Hello students and welcome to Political Science 1500, American Government. I am your professor, Dr. Jarvis Chen. As you guys saw in the previous video, I'm going to be out of the country during the first week of school because of some extenuating circumstances, but we'll have a very easy transition, so I'm going to be creating 2 lectures for you guys for the first week and a documentary for you guys to check out. Please just take a look at these at your leisure. Obviously, you don't have to wake up at 7:30 in the morning just to watch a couple of videos, so you can take it easy for that first week, and we're going to hit the ground running with the first real class on Monday the 15th. So when we're talking about politics, or just the class in general, it is not what you think. Rather, it's about how you think. It's about the foundation that you have that eventually led you to your conclusions and how you support that conclusion. In this class, we're going to be looking at the foundations of American representative democracy. So here are a couple of tips from me to you. Take the time to enjoy the class content. There are lots of readings and hopefully there'll be some documentaries and articles for you guys to check out. Take the time to just do the work. The big picture and the main themes are more important than those tiny little details. I'm not going to ask you for specific dates or numbers or anything of that sort. You'll have plenty of time after class to enjoy beautiful Boston in the summer. So let's talk about politics. Politics is the process of influencing actors or players and actions and policies within government. And this could be government within a nation, within a state, local government, or even a community. If you think about it, maybe when you were a child you had a secret club and it was like no boys allowed or no girls allowed. Those were the processes that were going on within your club. Those were the politics of the club, as a matter of who comes up with the rules and why is it that boys aren't allowed and why girls aren't allowed in your club. Government is the system of rules and the structures, the institutions that help to shape and define and to create and represent for the public or for public action. In your reading, you would have come across a pretty interesting story about a young girl named Bridget Mergens and her high school in Omaha, Nebraska. She wanted to start a Christian Bible group because at school they already had a photography club and they probably had a Young Dems and a Young Republicans club, so why couldn't she bond with her friends over the Bible? Well, the principal, Mr. Foley, and the school board, they saw this as interfering with secularism, the idea of separation between church and state. So Bridget, like any smart cookie, she decided to sue her school board. Ultimately, this went to court and she won. The court sided with her on the basis of the Equal Access Act of 1984, which was made for college students in order for them to have certain freedoms of speech and freedom of religion. It was so that colleges could have sponsor clubs on campus, a Christian Bible study group at Northeastern, for example. Ultimately, the court sided with Bridget and said that they expanded that and said, okay, well, if college students have these protections, why can't high school students? Interestingly enough, years down the line, this case was actually used in a court ruling that ruled in favor of a student trying to start a gay-straight alliance. That was a nice little vignette of kind of this big picture down to small scale of politics. Ultimately, all the actions between Bridget, the school board, and the court had a lot to do with American government. And the best way to look at American government is to at least start from the beginning and get an idea of the foundation for why things are today. Before 1776, the United States of America was not the United States of America. We were a colony of Great Britain, which is very interesting because if you think about it, we were British, essentially. So when Paul Revere, this Jack Black looking guy, rode through on his famous ride, and legend is he said, the British are coming, the British are coming. But the thing is, we were all British, so really What Paul Revere actually said was probably something along the lines of the redcoats are coming, or something of that matter, or the jerks from across the pond. In any case, the Declaration of Independence was this document that affirmed that we wanted to start our own republic, free from Great Britain and its oppression and the king. And we had these truths that were self-evident, that all men were created equal and endowed by a creator with inalienable rights or unalienable rights. Basically, rights that cannot be taken away. Chief among them, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These ideas came from the founding fathers. Chief among them was Thomas Jefferson. He believed in equality, liberty, and natural rights. That we should have social equality, or a government where everyone is in equal footing and no one is above another in terms of social standing. Political equality, meaning that we all have the same rights under the guise of the law. And economic equality, the idea that there should be relatively even distribution of wealth within the republic. Liberty, a commitment to social, political, and economic freedoms. Freedom from interference from the government. That's going to come up a lot in the modern day. Freedom to pursue one's dreams, the aim of equality, but also of opportunity. This too will come up a lot in the modern day. The idea that we can all pursue the American dream and achieve wondrous things, but also, what about the equality of those within the nation? Should we be allowed to have so much income inequality or social inequalities? How does this apply to Bridget's Christian Bible study? She felt that there was no reason for her to not be able to have this study group, just like there was no reason for people not to have a photography club or a Young Democrats. The idea that a school-sponsored club for a Christian study group does not necessarily mean that the Christian study group is seen as better than, let's say, a Jewish study group. Thomas Jefferson and the founders crafted these core American values when they wrote about the pursuit of happiness, the idea that you are choosing to pursue your dreams, and hard work and sacrifice and individual talents will hopefully yield those dreams. This notion has drawn millions of immigrants to the United States since its founding. I'm sure many of you probably have family that trace back to immigrants that came to the United States in one way or another. One question that we must ask ourselves is whether the American dream is still alive in this era of extreme economic inequality. You have such variation in income, not only in terms of education and status, but also in terms of location. Think about how much rent is in Boston compared to perhaps what rent is back home for you guys. There's this notion of American exceptionalism, that there is something just amazing about America, and history has given a lot of evidence that speaks to this exceptionalism that is the United States. However, we can say that for any number of countries, but if you think about it, America is, in a way, such a huge melting pot of many nationalities, identities, and beliefs in a way that almost isn't seen anywhere else in the world. There are many diasporas or small, tightly knit communities from other countries that exist here. We have Chinatowns, Koreatowns, little Tokyos, that kind of thing. In fact, Queens, New York, the borough of Queens, has the highest concentration of languages of anywhere in the world. As many as 800 languages are spoken in that one area. So the Declaration of Independence was mostly a list of accusations and charges against the English government and the king. It was a very political document. Think of it as like a political cartoon for the ages to defend and to affirm our beliefs as a new country looking to be founded. It was a message not only to Great Britain, but also the rest of the world, including other European countries. A very strong foundation from the Declaration came from European Enlightenment philosophers such as John Locke. Oh, not this John Locke, that John Locke, who, in this little quote here, all mankind being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. And also Baron de Montesquieu, there is no nation as so powerful as one that obeys its laws not from principles of fear or reason, but from passion. The idea of we were being unjustly oppressed without being properly represented. So of course, with these ideals in mind, America was founded as a democracy. Democracy comes from the Greek word demos, meaning people, and kratos, or power. In other words, power is held by the people. However, though we trace democracy to the Greeks and the Athenians, in actuality, the democracy of those was far from ideal and definitely not universal. For them, a citizen was a male who owned property, a free male. So women, slaves, or even other men that were just too poor to own property, they were not represented in Athenian democracy. Because we have these inalienable rights, these rights that cannot be taken away, what are these rights? Well, they start with the natural rights. These are the rights that you are born with, your natural born rights. And we attempt to achieve the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness through something called a social contract, which is an agreement in which the people give a little bit of their power or freedom to the government, may be able to take care of them in order for things to be orderly and functioning. We were also very sensitive to the idea of tyranny, the idea of a king. So we did not want any single entity, be it a president or any other institution, to have unlimited power or too much sway in our government. Thus, a series of checks were created known as the separation of powers. If we do not give government the power in order to help everyone achieve these rights, all the while preventing no single branch of government or a single entity within government to have too much power, we would have something known as the state of nature. The state of nature is this imaginary, hypothetical situation where everyone is on their own. You are hunting for yourself, you are protecting yourself, and you are only out for yourself. And obviously in these situations, there's no way for people to come together and work together to achieve amazing things or even organize. Surely no one's going to be able to grow seeds in a field if they're worried that their neighbor is going to murder them and steal everything. The state of nature is a very dog-eat-dog world, and the thing is, within the state of nature, you have all the freedom to do whatever you want. The problem is, everyone else also has all the freedom that they want as well. If you want to go hunt, you can go hunt. If you want to go hunt people, you can go hunt people. That's the state of nature. It's beautiful. But it's also quite disastrous for, things like life expectancy, dreams, goals, that kind of thing. You could think of the state of nature as Black Friday, but every single day of the week. Yes, it sounds like fun, every now and then, but every single day, I think the stress would probably get to each and every one of us. Here's another idea to explain the social contract. And this is something that you guys do every day. Think of a stoplight. And technically, there's nothing that a stoplight can physically do to prevent you from driving through it. You are in control of your own car, and in a way, you have the freedom to go wherever you please. You have the freedom to just run a red light. There's nothing magical about a red light. However, we've created this social contract amongst ourselves where if I am approaching a light that turns red, I am going to stop. In order for intersection to be orderly, to be safe, I'm going to give up my unlimited freedom to just drive however I please and I'm going to stop at this red light, almost like magic, and let others go so that they will, in turn, when I have a green light, do the same. The idea is I'm giving up a little bit of something for a lot of safety, for a lot of order, and so that I can have a much better commute. I will actually make it to work because of this social contract. If we all just drove as we pleased, most of us wouldn't make it to work. Certainly not without a fender bender. So in your book, you'll see the Declaration of Independence and the big list of all the grievances and complaints against the king. Please take a look at those, and we'll talk about those more later in class. So after being a colony of Great Britain for about 160, 170 years, it became clear that Great Britain did not have the best interests of the colonies in mind. They were heavily taxed by the British, with various actions such as the Revenue Act, the Townshend Act, the Stamp Act, the Paint Act, and other intolerable acts. Following various tit-for-tat political demonstrations and skirmishes to outright violence, including the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, we set to let our grievances be known, that we will now be boldly stating that we are now a sole country of our own and of our own creation and of our own values that are different from that of Great Britain. Though of course in the beginning, just like with Athenian democracy, there were many people that were excluded from this idea of representation and democracy within the United States. Women, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, the indigenous people of North America, and of course black slaves were excluded from having the ability to vote, and of course many of these inalienable rights. Of course, not everyone thought the same. There were many different factions within the United States before it was the United States. There were those that were loyalists, that were opposed to independence, basically the Canada of people in the United States, the radicals or patriots, who supported the idea of fighting England, even if it meant fighting man-to-man with armed combat. And then of course there were moderates who thought that a show of force may be necessary, but it should be the last resort in order to get to what we were going for, to fight England in other ways besides armed combat. In many ways, you can kind of see these different factions back then as mirroring factions today. You have people that are on the far right, the far left, and also moderates. Those who are very liberal in the policies that they support, individuals that are very conservative in the policies that they support, and people that kind of pick and choose from either side or do not really fall into either extreme. However, even though women were not given the same rights as men, there were women that participated in the boycotting of the British and also participated in many revolutionary acts. These were called the Daughters of Liberty. Various papers that contributed to something known as the Sentiments of American Women would eventually lead to the founding of the Ladies' Association of Philadelphia, which was the largest women's organization during the Revolutionary War. Of course, just starting the revolution was the easy part. The hard part was fighting the war. And we did very poorly during the early parts of the Revolutionary War. The British were better organized, better equipped, better trained, and a slew of diseases and issues due to the weather, the severe cold, decimated the strength of the colonies. Of course, we had to adapt to our strengths. The British were very regimented and very well trained for a British form of war, using riflemen. With our knowledge of the terrain, the colonists were able to take advantage of this very strict fighting style of the British by using guerrilla tactics, hit and run tactics, hiding, that sort of thing. No drums or anything of that sort. The organized nature of the British Army, which would normally be their strength in open fields, became their weakness when it came to fighting the colonists in tighter spaces and also in forests and woods. One of Great Britain's rivals, the French, fought on our side. We had won many battles thanks to the French, And then after the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which was signed in 1783 and then finally ratified in 1784, the colony was now secured from the rule of the British. I want to get one thing straight though. The American Revolution wasn't actually a revolution, because usually with a revolution, by definition, you have to overthrow the previous system or the previous rulers. Think of it as a coup d'etat. Now, King George was not overthrown. The British Empire remains intact to this day to please us Americans with the likes of Monty Python and Doctor Who. Rather, it wasn't a political revolution, but rather a revolution of ideas. The idea of government with natural rights and individual liberty. And of course, our form of democracy would later spread to other parts of the world. We became this blueprint that influenced so many others. After the founding, it took a little while for us to figure out the institutions that would eventually go into place that would be a part of what would now be modern American government. Institutions are the rules, laws, and structures that channel and shape political action. And various different types of government will vary in terms of the institutions and the power and how power is used in government or by government. For example, you can have a totalitarian government where there is no limit or very little limit to government power and government authority. Authoritarian governments where the voices of the public are suppressed, or the voices of individuals that are against the government are suppressed. Monarchies, which we fled from, where the power in government is concentrated in rulers or royal figures such as kings. And then also we have oligarchies, where power is concentrated to an elite few. Of course, there are different types of democracies. You could have a direct democracy, where citizens vote directly on public policies. Think of this as like a town hall where everyone raises their hands that support an idea, and those that don't just keep their hands down. Or a representative democracy, such as what we have in the United States, where we select representatives who go on and represent us and vote on our behalf on matters such as public policies and rules and regulations. Honestly, it would be pretty awkward if every single time something came up to the table in terms of legislation, if every single person in the United States had to vote on their own about whether or not to follow a piece of legislation or not. It is far more efficient to elect representatives on our behalf. However, we'll talk about this later on, how actually representative are these representatives. That'll be an entirely different matter. All of this is empowered by the Constitution of the United States. It forms the basis of our government and also creates the host of institutions and empowers those institutions to share power. It also places a institutional limit on the powers and actions of government and empowers our rights, such as the Bill of Rights, the freedom of speech, freedom to bear arms, those sorts of things. In America, we elect representatives to make the laws and policies on our behalf. And the limits are placed upon government through the Constitution, which is considered the highest and most supreme law of the land. If we make an amendment to the Constitution, a change, it will filter down to everything, including state governments, local governments. The thing to keep in mind is that the framers of the Constitution were afraid of big government, for the most part. They didn't want tyranny. They didn't want any more kings oppressing their citizens. There has to be a fine balance in this social contract, per se. The idea that we give up some freedoms for protection, for order, for guidance, for safety. And the powers and limitations of government will be something that we discuss a lot in this class, not to mention the processes that lead to these powers and limitations on government. They're always changing. We are making changes all the time to our government structure and the way things work. We'll talk more about this in future classes. But this pretty much finishes the first lecture of the class. Please make sure that you do the reading and to be prepared for the next lecture as well as the documentary. and then we'll talk about it some more when I see you guys in person. And don't forget, over in course materials, there is a companion site available for your Abernathy book. Here you'll see individual resources for chapters and concepts, including quizzes, learning objectives, and action plans, as well as discussion questions. It should be a pretty good resource for you guys to check out as you go through the book and through the course. Anyways, thanks for your patience with this first week. I hope you enjoyed the transition, easy transition over down to the summer semester, and I'll see you guys on Monday.